Hello, the topic we are discussing today is Cognitive Theory of Moral Development by Lawrence Kohlberg. The objectives of this module are: at the end of this chapter, students should be able to know stages of moral development as proposed by Lawrence Kohlberg. They should be able to understand what type of development occurs in a particular stage of life. They will be familiar with different concepts of moral development and know how different factors influence moral development according to his theory. Lawrence Kohlberg was particularly well known for his theory of moral development, which he popularized through research studies conducted at Harvard Center for Moral Education. Kohlberg extended, modified and refined Piaget's theory of moral development. According to Kohlberg, child's cognitive capabilities determine the evolution of his or her moral reasoning. His theory of moral development is a continual process that occurs throughout the lifespan. He found that a person's idea of morality changes as the person passes through a series of stages in the evolution of their sense of justice and in the kind of reasoning they use to make moral judgments. Achievement of each stage depends on how much the child has grasped in the previous stage. Largely because of the various cognitive limitations that Piaget's theory describes, pre-adolescent children tend to think either in terms of concrete, unvarying rules or in terms of rules of society. Adolescents, however, are capable of reasoning on a higher plane. Having typically reached Piaget's formal operational stage of cognitive development, because they are able to comprehend broad moral principles and they can understand that morality is not always black and white and that conflict can exist between two sets of socially accepted standards. He developed his theory of moral development on the basis of an analysis of interviews conducted with 10 to 16-year-old boys who were confronted with a series of moral dilemmas. Dilemmas, that is, to choose between acts of obedience to rules and authority or to the needs and welfares of others which conflicted with the regulations. A series of moral dilemmas were presented to these participants and they were also interviewed to determine the reasoning behind their judgments of each scenario. The following is one of the examples of the dilemma presented to young participants. In Europe, a woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was one drug that the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to make. He paid $200 for the radium but charged $2,000 for a small dose of drug. The sick woman's husband, Haynes, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could only get about $1,000. He told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it at a cheaper rate or let him pay later. But the druggist said, "No, I discovered the drug and I am going to make money from it." So Haynes got desperate and broke into the man's store to steal the drug for his wife. Should the husband have done that? The man must now decide whether or not to steal the drug to save his wife, whether to obey the rules and laws of society or to violate them in order to respond to the needs of his wife. What should the man do and why? The example of methodology is moral dilemma, stealing versus saving a life. Judgment, should the husband have stolen? And justification, why do you think he should have or should not have stolen? If Kohlberg based his stage analysis on judgments, there would be two stages. Firstly, yes, the man can steal, and secondly, no, the man should not steal. Kohlberg based stage analysis on people's justifications. People at different stages of moral development could give the same judgment but justify with different level of justifications. On the basis of his findings, Kohlberg formulated a series of 3 levels and 6 stages of moral development. In level 1, that is pre-conventional morality, occurs in early childhood. There are two stages. Stage 1, obedience and punishment orientation, and stage 2, naive, hedonistic and instrumental orientation. Pre-conventional morality is based on the desire to avoid punishment and gain rewards. That is, I will do what I am supposed to do in order to avoid punishment is the characteristic of this level, and the emphasis is more on events or physical needs rather than on people and standards. In stage 1, obedience and punishment orientation, to avoid punishment, the child listens to its superiors who are prestigious and powerful people. They avoid trouble so as not to be in a position where they can be punished. They put responsibility in objective situation and not in subjective intentions. The morality of an act is defined by its physical consequences. For example, a child curbs his desire to continue playing or watching cartoon shows and sits down to study as soon as his parents ask him or her to do so as to avoid punishment. Considering the earlier mentioned example of the story of Haynes, let us look at a sample of the moral reasoning of the subjects in this stage. When the dilemma was presented to the participants, the moral reasoning of the subjects who were in favor of stealing said, "If you let your wife die, you will get into trouble, you will be blamed for not spending the money to save her, and there will be an investigation of you and the druggist for your wife's death." Against stealing said, "You should not steal the drug because you will get caught and sent to jail if you do. If you do get away, your conscience will bother you thinking how the police will catch up with you at any minute." Now coming to the stage 2 of naive, hedonistic and instrumental orientation. In this child, the child conforms to gain rewards and understands reciprocity and sharing. However, the reciprocity is manipulative and self-serving rather than based on a true sense of justice, generosity, sympathy or compassion. It is a kind of bartering. For example, children tend to give something in order to receive what he or she wants from others. The child would say, "I will lend you my pencil if I can play with your toy." Let us again consider the story of Haynes and look at a sample of moral reasoning of the subjects in this stage. When the dilemma was presented to the participants, the moral reasoning of the subjects who were in favor of stealing said, "If you do happen to get caught, you could give the drug back and you wouldn't get much of a sentence. It would not bother you much to serve a little jail term if you have your wife when you get out." Those against stealing said, "You may not get much of a jail term if you steal the drug, but your wife will probably die before you get out. So it won't do you much good. If your wife dies, you shouldn't blame yourself. It isn't your fault she has cancer." In level 2, that is conventional morality, which occurs in late childhood, there are two stages. Stage 3, that is good boy and good girl orientation, and stage 4, maintenance of the social order. Conventional morality is based on the child's notion of, "I will do what I am supposed to do as things work out better when everyone follows the rules." The child identifies with his parents and conforms to what they regard as right and wrong. The child has the motives to conform, not the notion of ethical standards. In stage 3 of good boy or good girl orientation, he or she is concerned with others' approval or disapproval rather than their physical power. In this stage, the child's good behavior is designed to maintain approval by pleasing and helping others. It is to maintain goodwill that he conforms to families' and friends' standards. For example, a school student helps his academically weaker friends with lessons in order to gain approval from elders and to maintain good relationship with friends. Let us again consider the story of Haynes and look at a sample of moral reasoning of subjects in this stage. When the dilemma was presented to the participants, the moral reasoning of the subjects who were in favor of stealing said, No one will think you're bad if you steal the drug, but your family will think you're an inhuman husband if you don't. If you let your wife die, you'll never be able to look at anybody in the face again. Those against stealing said, "It is not just the druggist who will think you are a criminal, everyone else will too. After you steal the drug, you'll feel bad thinking how you have brought dishonor on your family and yourselves. You won't be able to face anyone again." In stage 4 of maintenance of the social order, the child now conforms not just to the standards of other individuals but to the social order. In this stage, the person blindly accepts social conventions and rules and believes that if society accepts these rules, they should be maintained to avoid blame. This is the epitome of law and order morality, involving unquestioning acceptance of social regulations. Many people never go beyond this level. An example of this is that most Indian students opt to make their careers in engineering or medicine in spite of their lack of interest, as these are seen as conventional professions acceptable to Indian society. Anyone going beyond these traditional lines is looked down upon as someone who cannot make it to these professions. Let us again consider to the story of Haynes and look at a sample of moral reasoning of subjects in this stage. When the dilemma was presented to the participants, the moral reasoning of the subjects who were in favor of stealing said, "If you have any sense of honor, you won't let your wife die just because you're afraid to do the only thing that will save her. You will always feel guilty that you caused her death if you do not do your duty to her." Those against stealing said, "You're desperate and you may not know you're doing wrong when you steal the drug, but you'll know you did wrong after you're sent to jail. You will always feel guilty for your dishonesty and law breaking." Coming to the level 3 of post-conventional morality, which begins from adolescence onwards, there are 2 stages. In stage 5, there is morality of contract, individual rights, and democratically accepted law. In stage 6, there is morality of individual principles and conscience. Post-conventional morality is characterized as self-accepted moral principles. I will do what I'm supposed to do because I think it is the right thing to do. Moral judgment is rational and internalized, and that conduct is controlled by an ethical code that is relatively independent of others' approval or criticism. Moral conflict is resolved in terms of broad ethical principles, and violating these principles results in guilt and self-condemnation. In stage 5 of morality of contract, individual rights, people have a flexibility of moral beliefs that they lacked in earlier stages. In this stage, morality is based on an agreement among individuals to conform to norms that appear necessary to maintain the social order and the rights of others. The social contract can be modified when people within a society rationally discuss alternatives that might be more advantageous to more members of the society. For example, people protest against the wrongdoings of political leaders and bureaucrats. This is a method of checking the abuse of power by people in position within a democratic society. Let us again consider the story of Haynes and look at a sample of moral reasoning of subjects in this stage. When the dilemma was presented to the participants, the moral reasoning of the subjects who were in favor of stealing said, "You will lose other people's respect, not gain it if you don't steal. If you let your wife die, it will be out of fear and not out of reasoning. So you'll just lose self-respect and probably the respect of others too." Those against stealing said, "You will lose your standing and respect in the community and violate the law. You will lose respect for yourself if you're carried away by emotion and forget the long-range point of view." In stage 6 of morality of individual principles and conscience, the intent is to avoid self-condemnation rather than criticism by others. In this stage, individuals conform both to social standards and to internalized ideals. They base their decisions on abstract principles involving justice, compassion, and equality. This is morality based on respect for others. Individuals in this stage have high individualistic moral beliefs that may at times conflict with rules accepted by the majority of society. For example, a police official goes against the orders of his superior to do something that he believes is right and for the betterment of society. Let us again consider the story of Haynes and look at a sample of moral reasoning of subjects in this stage. When the dilemma was presented to the participants, the moral reasoning of the subjects who were in favor of stealing said, "If you don't steal the drug and if you let your wife die, you'll always condemn yourselves for it afterwards. You won't be blamed and you'll have lived up to the outside rule of law, but you won't have lived up to your own standards of conscience." Those against stealing said, "If you steal the drug, you won't be blamed by other people, but you'll condemn yourself because you won't have lived up to your own conscience and standard of honesty." In summary, we can observe that individuals progress from one stage to another in the following manner. The progression between levels happens in this fashion. In level 1, people attend to themselves. In level 2, people attend to others and what others think of them. In level 3, people attend to society's standards and their relations to them and to their own principles. People with higher level of moral reasoning are more likely to assist others, less likely to engage in delinquent activities, and more likely to behave in a moral manner. Individuals at pre-conventional and conventional levels would act morally when external forces demand, but otherwise they may not, while individuals at the post-conventional level would act morally even when external forces may not favor it. Firstly, Kohlberg's theory is concerned with moral thinking, but there is a big difference between knowing what we ought to do versus our actual actions. Critics are of opinion that moral reasoning does not necessarily lead to moral behavior. Secondly, critics have pointed out that Kohlberg's theory of moral development overemphasizes the concept of justice. There are factors such as compassion, caring, and other interpersonal feelings that may play an important role in moral reasoning. Thirdly, one glaring shortcoming of Kohlberg's research is that he used primarily male participants. There is a fundamental difference in how men and women view moral behavior because of their distinct socialization experiences. Men view morality in terms of justice and fairness, while women view morality in terms of compassion, responsibility, and willingness to make sacrifices. Fourthly, Kohlberg's theory overemphasizes Western views and does not account for Eastern cultures that have different moral outlooks. Change in moral stage is influenced by many environmental factors like child rearing practices, schooling, peer interactions, and culture. These factors provide cognitive challenges to the children which provoke them to think about the moral problems in more complex ways. Let us look at the first factor of child rearing practices. Moral development is fostered by warm parenting and discussion of moral concerns. Children's moral development will be strengthened if parents provide a supportive atmosphere by listening sensitively, asking questions, and providing higher level of reasoning to those questions. In contrast, parents who lecture, use threats, or make sarcastic remarks have children who change little or not at all. Coming to the second factor of schooling, years of schooling and moral understanding are closely related. Moral reasoning advances in late adolescence and early adulthood as long as a person remains in college. College students who participate in academic discussions and who are more aware of social diversity tend to be advanced in moral reasoning. Thirdly, coming to the influence of peer interaction. Interaction among peers who discuss different viewpoints promote moral understanding. Adolescents who have close friends who often participate in conversation with friends and whom classmates view as leaders score higher in moral reasoning. Finally, let us look at the influence of culture. Young people from industrialized nations move to higher stages of moral development quickly than those in non-industrialized nations. Moral reasoning in young people is more advanced, especially in those who participate in the institutions of their society at early age. According to Kohlberg, moral thought and action comes together at a higher level of moral understanding. Mature moral thinkers realize that behaving in line with their beliefs is an important part of creating a just social world. Consistent with this idea, higher stage adolescents more often act pro-socially by helping, sharing and defending victims of injustice. They also less often engage in cheating, aggression and other antisocial behaviors. In conclusion, Kohlberg's theory shows that children develop morally from their interaction with parents, peers, and the society at large to become mature individuals. From the stage of obedience to authority, the child develops morally and learns to manipulate its environment to abide to the rules and gain approval. And finally, the mature individual learns to impact its environment by bringing out their distinct individualistic ideals and principles.